Bud Light, which Clay insists is the most intricate, luxurious, and fantastic tasting beer of all time. Or he says you can't tell the difference between Bud Light and whatever beer you like. I don't know. It's one or the other.
Not all beers, Buck. Like, there's a big difference between, like, I like Guinness, for instance. Guinness and Bud Light taste test would work. My argument, which has got people riled up for months now, is that the average person, Bud Light, Coors Light, Miller Light, there is not a substantial difference on a taste test there.
Is Guinness even beer? Isn't it like an ale or something? I don't think Guinness even qualifies as beer. I think
qualifies as a beer. You can toss in Blue Moon, which I like. You can toss in Gratis, which is my beer all over the state of Tennessee that Jay Cutler and a few other guys that I own.
Oh, wow.
That's a
Guinness
nice product.
It's a traditional Irish stout beer made from barley, hops, water, and a specific
Fabulous.
strain of Yeah,
wow. I love it. Yeah. You can't really drink beer, right?
A lot of gluten. No, I'm gluten is like kryptonite for me, man. Or rather, beer is like kryptonite for me. I can't drink.
I get made fun of sometimes, Buck, because if I see Guinness on tap and I roll up to a bar, I will get a Guinness, and then sometimes I'll ask the bartender. I'll be like, "Hey, how many Guinness?" Like, I was out in Scottsdale for the Super Bowl, and I was like really excited. I saw Guinness on tap. Now, I asked the girl, I was like, hey, how many people have ordered Guinness tonight? You know, it was the Waste Management Open Day or whatever. And she was like, you are the only person tonight to come up to this Scottsdale bar and order a Guinness. And I was like, well, I'm going to order several of them. So at least we'll keep the tap working here. So big difference there. But yes, Bud Light, Miller Light, Coors Light, you are correct. I will continue to take the slings and arrows. Not much difference.
I mean, these Miller Lite, honestly, there are people out there who are walking on their incline treadmill, drinking their Miller Lite, and they're just angry about Clay's blasphemy. Which
I'm going to get flattened somewhere soon by the treadmill walker, Miller Lite drinking community for sure.
So Bud Light, though, which has been America's top beer for many decades, I mean, it is iconic. I should say it was iconic in the beer industry in a way that was really similar to like a Coca-Cola or something, right? I think for most people, if you said, you know, what's the most common beer? What's the beer you order? They go, oh, Bud Light. It worked, right? That was the whole idea behind it. And it is now the second beer for the first time in many decades because, and Clay, you know what number one is, right?
I do, Buck, but I bet a huge percentage of our audience is going to have their minds blown because it would have taken me like 20 beers to guess this one as the biggest, most popular beer in America.
I would have assumed Coors Light would have been my second guess, just to put that out.
Or Miller Lite. I would have gone maybe Mick Ultra. I know Mick Ultra is popular. Like I would have guessed like those would have been the four, if you ask me right now, the four most popular beers in America.
Michelob Ultra? You running like an Ironman sometime soon,
no,
buddy?
I mean,
come on.
I think, look, when you are trying to be somewhat healthy in your beer drinking, which I realize is an oxymoron, I certainly am not stunned that people would try to drink the lowest calorie beer. Because again, if you're choosing a light beer, you're not choosing based on taste.
It really does tell you something now that two guys go to a bar, one orders Michelob Ultra and the other orders Bud Light. And the Michelob Ultra guy is like, ha, nice Bud Light there, buddy. You know, what's going on with you, right? Whereas back in the day. Anyway, okay, the number one beer in America is now Modelo. And I assume that Modelo is, actually, I don't know anything really about Modelo, although I know it's marketed primarily to Hispanic drinkers. So the large Hispanic population in America likes Modelo. I guess you could say, you know, I don't want to say anything is the Bud Light of something, but the Budweiser of the Hispanic community, if you will, is Modelo. And so this is number one. But what I think is so interesting, Clay, to get to the politics of this for a second, is that the effort that's underway right now, and you see this with the New York Times, there's all this analysis now that's popping up like, okay, like, so Bud Light sales are down a lot, but, you know, they had been declining for a while, and they really don't want the right and conservatism broadly to feel like, hold on a second, we can actually do this? You go super woke, and we can bring your brand to its knees? So there's a feverish rewriting of recent history that's going on.
That's right. And Buck, I tweeted about this yesterday. I saw you tweeting about that New York Times article where they're like, hey, Bud Light was already suffering, even though it had been the number one beer for 22 straight years. They're trying to argue that it wasn't really brought on as much by the boycott, that there were other challenges. Here's something that I think is interesting, and some people may have seen me sharing this data. I think the first brand to actually get Bud Lighted was the NBA. The National Basketball Association. And I think that because the sports media is so liberal, they refuse to acknowledge how many people had stopped watching the NBA. I shared yesterday on Twitter, Buck, 30-year history of NBA Finals ratings, going all the way back to when you and your beloved New York Knicks were actually in the mix to win championships. The numbers have completely tanked. And they've tanked in a way. 4 of the 5 lowest rated NBA finals have all occurred since the NBA put Black Lives Matter on the court and went full woke. And they don't want to acknowledge it. The sports media doesn't, for the same reason that the New York Times is trying now to pretend that the Bud Light thing might be connected to something else, because they don't want it to become understood that going woke is a disaster for brands. So they try to cover up what's clearly going on. And I think this is wildly important with Bud Light, Buck, because I think they're going to be teaching this in marketing classes for the next several generations. Hey, this is what happens when you alienate your core consumer. This is how effectively a brand commits suicide. And there had not been a public acknowledgement like this. People had talked about, left-wing boycotts and all these things. There had never been a group of just normal dudes, I would say in general, beer drinkers, who just said, I'm done, and actually took it to a brand as clearly as occurred here.
Your NBA example is particularly interesting to me because, as I've told you, and I'm very outspoken about actively avoiding most professional sports leagues in America now, and I do so. It's an intentional thing. It's not just. It's not that I never found it interesting. I did grow up going to Knicks games, watching the Knicks, caring a lot about the NBA, thinking it was all really cool, and changed my mind over time because of what happened. But I think about things like, LeBron James is the premier NBA player, right? Although I guess now it's kind of this guy Jokic, which is interesting.
Yeah,
but,
LeBron's starting to fade, but he's still the number one draw, right? Even
right.
at 38.
He's still the biggest name in the NBA. But didn't LeBron James tweet something out about a police officer?
Yes.
Like he needs to get his, or
he's next.
Did he dox him?
Yeah, yeah.
Or he's next. That's right. He's next.
He saved this police officer, I believe, in the Cleveland area, saved a girl who was going to be stabbed to death, potentially, shot the girl with the knife.
All on
LeBron,
video.
Yeah, all on video. Clearly, saved this girl's life, probably. Certainly saved her from serious injury. And LeBron posted a screenshot of that police officer and said he's next in the wake of the George Floyd protests. And yeah, I think LeBron destroyed the NBA's brand. I really do. And they're refusing to acknowledge it. I really.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm getting. LeBron James is, as a person, as a public person, a disgrace. He's amazing at basketball. Congratulations. God gave him a gift. He's fantastic at basketball. When I pulled up the Ma'Khia Bryant incident, you can see it on video yourself. A cop is watching, or is there as 2 girls, both young black girls, are in some kind of altercation, and he's yelling, "Stop, stop, stop!" And one girl has a knife in her hand, is swinging it back to stab to death the other girl. The cop had been yelling, "Stop, stop, stop." If he didn't shoot, he would have been effectively a complicit bystander as a law enforcement officer in this murder. And LeBron James tweeted out, "You're next. #accountability" about the cop. Now, that's not just wrong, that's nefarious. That's not just wrong, that's insidious. And it's not just LeBron James. There have been other players who have done similar things, and there are other players who are weighing in very heavily, or former players weighing very heavily into politics. But I think that LeBron James has, he's changed, among others, And it's certainly team policies too, but he's changed my view of that league. I won't watch it anymore.
Well, and this is important, Buck, because the numbers reflect that there are many people like you. And the NBA now is furiously trying to backpedal from politics because, again, 4 of the 5 lowest rated NBA finals in the last 30 years have happened since the NBA went full woke. And if you look, you can go check on my Twitter feed. We'll put it up at Clay and Buck, the graphic. You can see basically around 2017, I would say, is when the NBA lost its mind with wokeness. And you'll recall, Buck, you probably remember this story. That's when they pulled the All-Star game out of Charlotte over the transgender bathroom bill there and refused to allow Charlotte, North Carolina to host that game. And they did it. Adam Silver, everybody was praised for, being super woke there. It's interesting because they just went to Salt Lake City. We're number 1 in Salt Lake City. We love you guys. The Jazz hosted the All-Star game, lowest rated All-Star game ever. Adam Silver said, we're not going to combat the transgender laws that have been passed in Utah, and we're not going to take any action about it because we don't think that's our job anymore. Well, that's interesting because so many people have abandoned. I think it's worth kind of putting a pin in that and paying attention to it because Bud Light is built on it.